Dan, can you repeat the very last thing you said before you went and got your coffee?
um, we're talking about phases of life,
Reinventing yourself.
reinventing
Every,
yourself every 10 years. I have this notion, and I don't know if I haven't fully fleshed it out in my mind, that a man should reinvent everything about himself every decade, do a new phase. Because it feels like that's the way it's been for me. Everything changed every 10 years, where I lived, everything. I don't know if that's sound advice or not, or something that but static, yeah, I'm not sure.
I have two questions at the outset. I mean, I've heard you say this before, right? And we've talked about it, I think, somewhere else. One, every 10 years, that seems quite a long time, actually. Would we benefit from it being every 5 years, or people talk about 7 year cycles, right? Every 7 years there is
Yeah.
a Saturn returns, and there's something about the gravity shifts. So that's one question. The other thing, maybe slightly facetious, but what what comes up for me is, if you don't reinvent yourself every 10 years or every 7 years or whatever it is, will the reinvention happen for you? I.e., will life reinvent you, perhaps not to your best conscious design?
Yeah, like 10 years obviously is arbitrary. You could say every 2 years, right? But it feels like it does follow along the ley lines of the decades of your life. In other words, your 20s have a different flavor than your 30s. And your 30s have a different flavor than your 40s. So I do think it kind of follows along those lines of those decades. You feel differently when you turn 30 and you move from 30 to 40. And your 40s are different and your 50s are different. And maybe some people that are just in the same job year after year, they don't feel that they they don't feel that there's a change. And maybe, like you said, change is imposed upon them, but then that change that's imposed upon them would be something like a health issue.
Yeah.
Um, because you work at the gas station for the next 30 years and just, buy a new TV every 5 years. You could just cycle it. But there's different than that, because anybody who's anybody who's on a spiritual path, which is a cliche, which doesn't mean anything, but anybody who's trying to be more excellent, I guess you could say, or trying to understand their their narrative, the way I say it is their narrative, their story. They're trying to create their life as a story that has chapters. Anybody that sees their journey as a chapter based thing, um, will have these phase shifts. They will because they're learning and growing, and they're curious, and they're heading toward it. The big thing, the big advice, and the big counsel in the last 20 years is the power of now, which is the present is all we have. We have this slice of time. The past is an illusion, and the future is an illusion. And so we should live in the moment, maximize with gratitude the moment we have. And that's sound advice, because it stops us from blaming the past for our situation today, and it stops us from worrying about the future. That's going to take care of itself. But what it does, it risks giving us disservice to narrative and story. We were there, and we're on this trajectory to there in our lives, but also in the history of humanity. Like, we're on the cusp of AI, and in my lifetime, I saw the birth of the internet and the birth of computers when I was a kid. And so there's a narrative of civilization that you get to be part of, and there's a narrative of your life that you can be a part of. And when we concentrate just on the power of now, the singular moment, we may lose track of viewing our life as a story with phases, which is cool. If that kind of makes sense to you, I don't know.
Well,
It's a chapter book.
let's. I mean, we were speaking before we hit record, and just to be a bit more personal, you, at your age, if you see your life in decades, actually begin in a new phase or a new chapter.
Yeah.
And I'm actually working on a 7-year rotation. So, I mean, you could chop your life up however you want, right? But I'm thinking I'm actually coming to the end of a very significant 7-year rotation. So it's been exactly 7 years that I'm with Adelia. It's been 7 years basically that I've been in Asia. So that thing is completing, and now there's a jump off to something new. And next week I'm moving, right? I'm transitioning continent, and we're going to, at least for a period of time, set up our lives in a different part of the world. So I'm also sitting in this topic of new chapter. Literally, the book is not open yet. I've been thinking about what would be in the next chapter for a long time. And now with the logistics of trying to make the chapter happen, I forgot what was it all about. Like with all the tasks that we have to do to pack up our home and to get to the other side of the world, it's like, why are we even starting afresh or starting a new chapter and closing off the old one? So I'm in this very strange headspace where I can't even sense into yet what the next chapter is going to be about, or if I could, I've forgotten it. And I think, right, so I'm very interested, like you're starting a new chapter, I'm starting a new chapter. I have a sense that for the people that are listening to the podcast, if you're drawn to this conversation, you might be also on a similar starting the new phase. That's my assumption. I imagine that people listening to us are similarly having a same inquiry. So I have no incisive question, but it's something about, realizing, kind of waking up in the midst of your life and realizing that the chapter changed. And maybe you saw it change or you planned for it, maybe you didn't, but all of a sudden the page is quite blank. That can be quite disconcerting, but I think very creative. So something about this, what is it like to start a new chapter?
Well, I think that the idea of it is that we, you don't know, you don't set out to, or maybe you do, but you kind of feel that something's shifting. You feel like the page is turned. It's strange because what I was beholden to the last 5-7 years or whatever, it feels like I'm not beholden to that so much anymore, and I'm interested in something else, or I'm moving to something else. So I think that the new chapter kind of blossoms on you, and you didn't really. It's not something you, unless you quit your job and went into nothing, and forcibly started a new page. It just kind of dawns on you that something's changing in the way you look at the world and what you want, and maybe age and experience comes along and does that. But you have no idea. If you set out to say, I'm going to write this next chapter and it's going to look like this, you're going to be very surprised because you have no idea what, for you, for instance, you're moving to a new part of the world. You have no idea what's going to unfold and how what's going to open up for you. You have no idea, but you're a seeker. So you're curious. So your mind will be prepared. Chance favors the prepared mind, and luck favors the lucky.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be prepared for what comes down the path because your eyes are open to because you're curious about your next thing that happens for you. And a lot of guys are not. They just exist and they just react and they just say, "Okay, I'm going to get this new job," and I don't know. But there's certain phases of life. Like they say that life begins at 40. There's something really powerful. I remember a guy told me he owned this coin store when I was a kid. I remember I'd go into his coin store because I love old coins. And I would go in there and I was just 19, 20, 21. I can't remember. And he was in his 50s, 60s or something like that. And he told me, he would give me life advice and he would tell me, you know what? He told me this one time, he said, you're struggling right now and you're in debt. You're trying to figure it out. But he said, when you turn 40, he said, these kind of things, you become more aware, and your mind is more prepared, and money becomes more of a thing that is around you, as opposed to something you're scrabbling for. You'll be surprised when you turn 40. The old cliche that life begins at 40, but he said, when you get later in life, the things that you were worried about take care of themselves, like money. And like if a family's struggling in their 20s and 30s with 2 little kids, by the time they're in their 40s, for some reason, the household is making enough money that it's less of a problem. Without trying, or without making a major change, they just become more aware of something. Something changes in your consciousness. You become more understanding. So I don't know. There's something to that, I think. It's like I'm always, and I'm writing about this in my book right now, a life with a narrative, cradle to grave. There's a lot of parallels to a civilization, cradle to grave. It goes through phases of creative jump starts and then fallbacks. And so I think that there's a natural progression of, there's parallels to the way civilization, like consciousness or intelligence. We go from, for instance, in our worship, we used to worship things as sticks that had very tangible things we could smell and eat and, burn a calf and stuff like that. And as you get more complex, your mind gets more complex, civilization gets more complex, your worship becomes more abstract ideas that aren't wooden in front of you. It becomes more complexity. And there's a train of thought that the people in the 1300s, for instance, could not understand something like the internet. They didn't have the mental capacity for it. Because as technology, I mean, there's what I call kind of an information debt or a technology debt, where the technology is flowing so fast that our minds are only going at a normal pace, and the technology is going algorithmically, that we can't contain or we can't address it all, because the complexity is so vast and so incredible. And the history of our Western civilization is doing that. It's becoming so complex that it's becoming abstract. We used to, eat off the land and till the soil and hunt our foods. Now it's all abstract. It's been abstracted away from us into thought. Now we eat by our thought, And it's interesting. And I think the human life does the same thing. That's what I'm trying to say. Your life from now to 100 years old has the same movement toward abstraction. Something like that. I haven't figured it out yet, but it makes sense. Like, it becomes more abstract. Your life becomes more complex. Your mind becomes more complex as you grow older. And so abstraction is now, you think in abstractions as opposed to, I got to eat something, I got to hump something, I got to, that looks cool over there. I'm gonna go on a trip to Mexico, and these kind of get abstracted away into more, just like civilizations or technology. I don't know.
Yeah, everything in a way.
And there's a black hole, which what I've been thinking about these days. I had this idea of the term I invented, I think, is information gravity. Like information, if you stand back and look at it, we know it now with the LLMs and ChatGPT and all this. Information collates into just like the universe does. It gravitationally pulls into like-minded information. And there's probably 10% of information that we have access to, and 90% that has never been cataloged, understood, spoken. That's all perspectives. That's tribal wisdom. There's 90% of dark information out there, just like this dark matter. And I think there's parallels. I think there's a gravitational field to information, physically, real thing. I think it attracts ideas. That's why creatives all of a sudden come up with the same idea across the world. The same, like,
Where's the dark matter in this? Like, dark matter is something that attracts this growth of abstraction towards it.
well, dark matter, the reason that the dark matter is not measurable, but they believe that it is dark matter, there has to be something, because the gravitational forces of planets and galaxies and black holes and everything out there can't explain the way things are held together. So there has to be other gravitational forces that we can't see that keep things in sync and keep things locked in mathematically. Mathematically, what we see, all the matter we see out there, everything we see, every star and everything, is too loosey-goosey to keep everything tight like it is. It would blow apart.
So is this a bit like saying there is a force, a bit like gravity, towards which evolution is attracted, and we're on our journey towards this thing that is pulling in a coherent way everything towards
information.
It.
I think information has a gravitational field that we're drawn to. That's why a muse will sit there with a piece of music or a painting, and it will come to him from, we call it from the ether. That's what they used to say, from the muse, right? I do think, I haven't figured it out or floated in my mind, but there's an information gravitational field that like attracts like, peak calls to peak, deep calls to deep, and things collate. And that's why there's fits and starts in creativity and fits and starts in our civilizations, for instance, the way we develop. Like you develop the writing, and all of a sudden the way you think is different. Now memories can be contained, and then you develop the printing press, and the way you think, the way humans think has now changes because now it's mass produced, and now it's mass information, and you invent the internet, and now it's network. We think in networks we never did before. We think in networks and flowing, and so all these information is gravitationally going in fits and starts in galaxies and stars exploding in the information world, something like that. I don't know if that's what anybody wants to hear or anything, but it's fascinating to me. But I think it's very real.
Do you sense that the people and the culture that we are due to become is already marked, and we are invariably on a direct path to become
this is the extension of that. We're so bound to the idea that we have agency, and matter is prime. In other words, out of matter arises consciousness, arises information. But imagine if it's the other way around. Information is the substrate, and matter is an immersion from that, and it's a computational universe.
What do you mean by information then? I think we need a definition.
Well, information, to me, is everything that has ever been described or understood, every perspective, every manner, every word, every thought process, that the primitive people had to us. That information is getting more complex, and it's gathering together in what I would think maps out just like the universe maps out. There's galaxies of information. I just have I'm just assuming this because I have obviously no evidence of this, but it feels like when, for instance, the world came to the turn of the century, 1900s, and it's the artists that go first. Kandinsky and Picasso started to deconstruct shapes and forms. In the art world, music did the same thing with Adorno and stuff. They started to break down tonal structures that we're used to, and all at the same time, the artist kind of did this. And then Einstein comes along and rips apart the Newtonian surety of, perfect, and it became probabilities. So the art predates the science. The art is like saying something, and how they're not more brilliant than anybody else, just because they're connected to, because the information is gathering into a gravitational field that everybody's pulled toward, everybody sees. So Einstein, Picasso, Kandinsky, Braque, all these guys, they all turned to this and they all felt that there's something shifting in the consciousness, and they all tried to depict it in their own way. James Joyce deconstructed language at the same time, and so it's the same now. But you can't see that what is happening until you look at it, 20 years later. You can't name that epoch. Say, oh, this is the epoch of the deconstruction of art, modernism. Nobody knew it was modernism when they're in it. Nobody knows it's Art Nouveau when they're in it. It just feels like everybody's doing the same thing. And why? Because and it's not like one person starts it and copies it necessarily. It's like kind of they all feel this. The industrial age informs art. No, the art informs industrial age, etc. And and civilizations are speeding up. And it used to take like 100 years to make a change of technology or something. Like you would see, we're still riding horses and we're still making saddles, and 100 years later, there's some technology improvement in that. Leaf springs and carriages. Now you don't have to sit there and ask the story because they invented springs, right? But that took a long time and slowly adopted. Now everything is fastly adopted and fastly new, and the internet comes along and it's just decentralized, beautiful data thing, and then it's gathered into social media, and now it's breaking apart, and it goes fast.
I think that's what's happened in the last few years, that the unfolding of culture and technology has become so faster than the mind can keep up with it.
Correct.
And I think this shift happened in the last 8 years somewhere. Like before,
Yep.
we could just about chart. Oh, that's the new computer upgrade. I can manage that. But now with the amount of activity going on, so much is unreported and decentralized. I don't know what's going to happen next.
Well, that's interesting because now we're outsourcing our brains. We have to. Our memories and our thought processes are being externalized, and we're using machines to pick up that slack that we can no longer our meat can't process it. So we have hard drives, and we have networks, and we have processors that are doing that thinking for us, and trying to, an AI coming along, whatever this means, that we're outsourcing our knowledge, and the complexity of systems. I mean, you look at the transportation and food system. If one part of that fails, the whole civilization fails within a few days. It's so complex and so intertwined that we can't understand it. No one person can understand it. Its complexity is moved beyond the human understanding, and it exists and it goes. And you can, I think that's why scientists have specialized. Einstein could sit there and think, and invent an entire thing, where now scientists are all, every scientific paper's got 7 authors on it, because, and they're picking up research that Jordan did in Bali, and they're stacking on top of each other. And maybe they always did this to a degree, but it's really evident now that there's no one standout. A standout scientist like an Einstein or a Niels Bohr, or a standout mathematician like they used to have, like Euler or this kind of stuff. It's collation. It's the complexity's gotten so much, and the abstraction's gotten so much, that it's all networks of people, networks of scientists, networks of mathematicians that are all working on the same thing, and very specialized. So I don't even know what I'm saying, but it's fascinating.
So I'm very bewildered by what you're saying. It's not like I can't keep up with it, but it's just like it's quite bewildering to take it all in. I think, my initial question, which is, I'm an individual person worried about the new phase of my life or contending with being in something that feels like a new phase. How do I deal with that? And when you start speaking about, the universe's information is dark matter that's pulling us towards it, and we're all on this ride, and really your free will is just like how you spend your life, but we're all ending up in the same place anyway, through a complexity of factors far beyond our understanding, let alone our control. I don't really think or worry actually about my personal plan quite so much. But so like sometimes during your share, I was laughing because it's like the, how do you call it? The shedding away of my self-concern. That happens by considering the big questions. What this leaves me in is, and I'm going to continue to fight for me and trying to have a new phase in my life, because I'm fighting for the everyman listener here. Like, why is any of this useful for me to understand?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to navigate my own suffering and have a nice relationship or create something meaningful before I die, right? I want to bring it back to the singular person perspective. My angst about what my new phase is reduced because I'm listening to wild philosophical, mathematical, spiritual perspectives. And what I'm left with is, I still think I'm in a new phase of my life. What the hell? How do I navigate this? Given I'm fundamentally in a world that's not going backwards and I can't understand it. And I'm literally like asking ChatGPT for what's going on and how I should solve my next problem.
I think, Jordan, that this is a good thing, that the thing we're talking about here, because what you're talking about is the perspective of standing back from your personal existence, your personal life, and having a look at where you were, where you would like to go. And the perspective calms your heart because you're not in the moment of, oh, what do I do next? That perspective shift of backing out and taking a bird's eye view of your narrative, like you said, releases the fears and the anxiety, because you've been in places in your life in the past where you didn't know and you were worried and there was something major happening, and it's worked out to where you are now. So the perspective shift will save you and calm you down and realize your role in this narrative, not the power of now, but the narrative of your life. And if you back out even further, I think, to the perspective of civilizations and, what's happening and changing in Western civilization for certain, you can also have a calming effect to yourself instead of being thinking, like, oh, doom and gloom and the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Things are maybe, something can kind of quiet in your anxiety about civilizations too, when you look at the whole spectrum of it, and it's inevitable we're going in a certain direction. And who says who says it's bad? We always had the same kind of, imagine the late 1800s, they pictured the future of transportation. We're going to have these metal tubes, people are floating around, and they would depict it in the art. And then the 20s and 30s, they had more of a high-speed train kind of future, and then in the 50s, it was the flying cars. We'd all be trying, going 50s and 60s flying cars. It's another phrase I've invented in my mind. The law of the forgotten future.
How does this one stick together?
Well, the idea is that there was a consciousness of feeling of what the future is going to be like, and everybody thought it.
Yeah.
And then it went away. So and the civilization forgot it, and then it materializes. So for instance, the internet was, and the way we network and the way we decentralize, that comes from Vedic. There was very strong in the Vedic mythologies and stuff like that. So it's been thought about in that kind of way. I don't know, but I think the future is perceived in a certain way, and then we forget that, and then it materializes. So whatever the books and the movies and stuff that are talking about now, and perceiving the future, like say 50 years, 100 years from now, we're going to forget it and think it's something different, and then it's going to be something like that. The love to forgotten future. I have to figure that out too.
So the
I
flying cars will come back in, and we'll have this
yes,
great retro reminiscence of what it would look like to have a 1950s flying Cadillac and the Jetsons and all
yes.
this. There will be a way.
It's like you look at the evolution of the smartphone. Star Trek comes up with these, basically smartphones that they're talking to each other, beam me up, Scotty, and this kind of stuff, right? And we thought, what a futuristic world, or you could have a video call to somebody. What a
Yeah,
futuristic world that would be. But it's not, it's way in the future. And we didn't get, what's amazed me about smartphones? We have that technology. All of the computing power that they had 30 years ago is condensed. The world's computing power is condensed into this one little smartphone you have. And every gadget you used to buy in the 80s, every video camera, every stereo, every calendar, every clock radio is now contained in one little gadget. And we complain about the price. And even though that in the 80s, man, you spent $20,000 to get all those gadgets, right? So,
and there'd
so
be out. They'd be dead in a couple of years, and then you have this
yeah,
drawer in your house full of all these dead gadgets that you never used anyway, because they're all
exactly.
always faulty and always a beta version on the way to something else.
So this smartphone, Jordan, it amazes me that we are not completely stunned into the core of our being about what a smartphone is, because it snuck up on us. If somebody took a modern Apple iPhone today and took it back into the 70s and showed it to people, they would think I've seen glory. I've seen alien technology. This is the most amazing thing I have ever seen. But because it started with, like these beat up old, Nokias and stuff like that, and it's slowly a
Yeah,
big phone like this, and it slowly became more than a phone and slowly evolved into what we have. Nobody's in awe. And they bitch about it. Oh, my phone cost you
they
$1,200.
want to get away from it. They think my phone is my
Yeah.
prison, and I have no
And
phone days, and I throw it in a safe overnight, so it's not in my bedroom.
that's a shock that they want to get away from it because it is so amazing. And it gives us the world's knowledge at our fingertips. You can go to ChatGPT and have an AI assistant or a personal therapist right there
Yeah,
while you're sitting on a boat in the wilderness, and nobody's in awe of it because it kind of grew on us and everybody takes it for granted. But to me, I'm in awe of it. And that it's a good example, I think, of something. I don't know what, but
so do forgotten futures always come back? And if not, how are they decided?
yes, because I think the information gravity, which is my other thing, starts to collate, and people are drawn to it. We don't know why the arts are drawn to a certain thing and they gather around and become a new form star, for instance, or the planets that are circulating around that star. As this universe of information forms and shapes and gravitational fields evolve, um, um, it's kind of my idea that this is why all at the same time on Earth, things take a shift. Like, for instance, the grunge movement in music. Everything was hair bands and, like scorpions and, all this kind of stuff and long hair and loud, clashy. And the world shifted universally into ratty sweaters, shorter hair, grungier, well, grunge, basically. Just kind of shifted. The consciousness shifted. And you can look back on it and see that major shift.
Hmm.
But it was a very real thing. And all of a sudden, the long haired spandex, you know, um, rockers, they were not cool. That's gone. Like within a year or two, that's gone. Like you can't like that anymore because And we say it's fads and stuff like that, but I think we're drawn towards art will go in a certain way, then science follows it. That it's the way it goes. Science doesn't lead the way, and then the artists have tapped into something faster. But we're all drawn towards this gravitational force of what's the cultures. So we have no choice. Oh my goodness. I don't know if this is helpful for people, but I like it.
Well, it might be another form of therapy. It's like non-duality, which is the spiritual perspective where you go and sit in an environment or meditate with a guru who's in a state of non-duality, and it's just like your personal concerns are waiting for you when you go back home, but for a few hours at least you meditate on something so vast nothing's important anymore. You get in a good spirit of humor and you go back. It's almost like science and maths and philosophy gives you a sense of just popping out into some much vaster perspective. I think
to a broader perspective, right?
Yeah, in which your small troubles seem insignificant and therefore manageable again, because you become more vast, because you take in something more broad, and it's challenging. So where I'm curious, let's say I'm about to turn this chapter into a new phase of my life, as I'm assuming all the listeners are. And there's a way in which there is information that has already long been pulling me into this chapter beyond the scope of my knowing. And so the future has already pulled me into this. So in a way, I could just kind of surrender and enjoy the ride, as some people will advise you. But I also have this sense of, in a linear fashion, I've come from the past. If I didn't stick up for myself and defend myself and really think and plan everything, I would not be all right. The fact that I got here today is not just thanks to the future pulling me forth, but as the past me that's kept myself together in the midst of, financial uncertainty and what am I going to do for a job when I grow up and all that kind of stuff. So I'm entering a new phase, and there's a sense that the limited me is perhaps designing it or writing it, but also a way in which this has already been called forth and written by the future.
Yeah, I'm not talking predestination, which is like, but if you're any kind of a scientific mind and you believe in, for instance, the Big Bang, you have to believe in predestination. Those molecules, that entire universe exploded like this, mathematically, physics wise, etc., to get you, eating Cheerios and breakfast in the morning with milk on it. That was inevitable because those molecules and that strata of complete matter and ideas came together to form you. Then you must believe that. I mean, there's a whole debate about what free will is, and the consciousness and stuff like that, and whether it's free will. And I think if you're a physicist on that level, you can only believe in free will because of probabilities, because of the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So there's probabilities of way it could go, and so maybe free will allows you to choose left rather than right. I mean, there's been studies with people that are going to pick up a pen, and they watch the brain waves, and before they have the thought to pick up the pen, there's a millimeter of second of impulse, and before they've had the thought, and then the thought comes. It's like the impulse to pick up the pen predates the thought that I'm going to pick up this pen, which is a surprise to the researchers. I mean, we're getting into like territory that has been explored and nobody has an answer for, like the idea of free will. Do we have it or not? And should all the murderers be let out of prison because they had no choice? You know what I mean? Or you lock them up because it's safer. But it's not their fault. That's predestination, and that's lack of free will. And if you have any kind of spiritual mind at all, layered on top of your scientific mind, then you must believe that there is free will, because we get choice in our salvation and in how we want to live our lives, and charity that we want to do, you know? So it's a perspectives is amazing. You know, I think that the subject or the tone of what this conversation in a practical way for guys is that your life is going to be in phases. If you're a seeker, you're going to have chapters in your chapter book, and you don't know what that chapter is going to look like. And if you back out to the bird's eye view of your personal narrative, it's interesting. You look where you came from and you have no idea where you're going to go, but you trust that process, that flow, because you're open-minded and the chapters are going to unfold. And then if you back out further to the civilizations, you don't get anxiety about, the future, being doomed, etc., and zombies coming in and eating our brains, because you see that there's some progression of something, and it's interesting, and technology is interesting, information is interesting, that acceleration is interesting. And if you use perspective in all the things, like I'm nervous to go talk to that girl. What solved it for me, guys, is how do you get out of that nervousness? You don't. But you can back out to the perspective of that perspective that one of these days I'm going to be dead, and I'm not dead yet. And there's a girl that's pretty to me, and the perspective that I'm nervous in my head, and so is she. So it's all perspectives, like backing out and taking a look at yourself. And I might, abstract yourself out of your body, look at yourself, hey, look at me. I see that girl now. My face is all red. My ears are twitching, and I'm shuffling from foot to foot. And isn't that interesting? You don't try and judge it or fix it. You just say, that's interesting. And so, but the perspective, you back it out. We talk about this in our basic essentials course, in our membership, the concept of perspectives and what's the perspective of a dog walking by? You're all nervous looking at the girl, and a dog walks by. What's his perspective? He just sees it. Oh, it's a guy looking at a girl. You can choose any perspective you want. So, and our assumptions. So it's this whole conversation to me is all about the way we're looking at things, and we can have this optimistic fascination and curiosity and wonder about our lot in life and where we are in this point in civilization, or we can think, oh, the world's going to be destroyed, and diseases and pandemics are our future. We can have whatever perspective we choose, and same with the girl that we're nervous to talk to, and same with our life as a story. Just backing it out and looking at it, and holding it up in the air without judgment. My life, holding it up in the air, say, okay, well, something's changing for me. I'm moving, like you, for instance. And instead of sitting in the weeds of it and trying to what do I do? And stressed about this, and I hope that works out, and that didn't work out, and that failed, and I don't have money for this. You stand back and look at the whole trajectory of your life. Think, this is cool. This is interesting. I'm curious about what this next phase, and I have no idea. And I don't have the money for this, but something's going to develop. Right? Something like that.
Yeah, I'm listening to what you're saying, and when I visualize, because I'm getting this really strongly, when I visualize next week and what it's going to be like to open the new chapter. So I'm walking around the new city, and those first moments of being in a new place, I feel completely ignorant. Like, what a Neanderthal I am compared to the vastness of this information which is out there, which is knowable. And I'm walking around with, scratching my hairy ass trying to figure out where I'm going to get a cheap lunch that locals eat and not an overpriced tourist restaurant or whatever it is, right? Where can I get a decent kebab around here, right?
That's funny.
And how the ignorance of my limited perspective about why I'm doing what I'm doing and also what's going to happen is colossal ignorance. But I'm not saying this in a defeatist way. There's actually a lot of wonder to it. But it's I think at the beginning of this episode, I was like, Zan, so what about this phenomenon of reinventing yourself or your life turning a new chapter? And I'm thinking, probably we can come up with some guidelines here to have a man feel more assured or cognizant or secure or clear in why he's doing the things that he's doing. But I'm coming out of this with a blessed sense of I wouldn't quite say cosmic, but like a colossal ignorance, which is not suffering or painful, but a recognition of just how much I don't know and
Yeah.
cannot know. And therefore, it's like, wow, just navigating all this, in a way, it's quite exciting, because the openness of what could happen is so large. But boy, if I think about what the new chapter is, I'm actually less sure about it than ever. Because one thing I'm not doing, which I definitely did 10 years ago all the time, is this thing that you propose actually, which is designing your life. So
Mm-hmm.
the older I get, the less inclined I am to design every single millimeter of my life, and the more I want to just focus on the one or two things that are absolutely essential. And so a long time
Mm-hmm.
ago, if you take a basic level coaching program, they're like, you have 12 areas of your life, and today we're going to coach you on every one of the 12 areas. How is the brain supposed to remember all of that and then visualize it the next day and create an
Yeah.
action plan to improve 12 areas of their life? It's nonsense, because the amount of self-involved activity that kicks off is too much. You'll end up driving yourself crazy. You cannot self-improve yourself in every single axis until you become this particular vision that you have. Much wiser, it turns out, just to declare, I literally have one singular devotion or activity in this life that is most my thing. And I want to do that.
Yeah.
And, in giving myself to that, I can actually enjoy a vaster amount of my life without having to control every domain in my life or turn every domain in my life into a never-ending project. So this is somewhere I've gone. I'm curious to hear your take then. If you're starting if you're starting a new phase or a new chapter, then potentially every corner of your philosophy that you've spoken about over the years now has a refurbishment, shall we say?
Right.
It has an updated code in it. So I'm curious where you stand today about an individual designing his life in the midst of this
Well, the
mind-boggling
design,
complexity that we now
when I
sit
talk
in.
about designing life, and the way we put it in our essentials course, is not that you got a to-do list and you check off the boxes or a bucket list. Before I die, I want to do this and this and this, or a goals list, a list of goals. Not goals. I want to make $1 million before I'm 40 years old, that kind of thing. It's designing your life is, to me, it is taking time every day, as I say, as we've been teaching for years, to pause your life and consider. You don't know the answers. You don't know how to design this day. You just want to sit in a meditative state for a few seconds before you launch into your doom scrolling and your coffee and your newspaper and all that kind of stuff. You want to just sit and contemplate what you've been given in this moment. Everything we talked about in this call, the phases of your life, this age you're sitting on the end of your bed wondering about this with your list that I talk about, and opening up your mind into a prayerful state of I'm going to move forward in my life in a hopeful way towards my future today. You don't know what you're going to meet, who you're going to meet, what's going to happen. So designing your life isn't saying, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. It is not that at all. It's changing the way you look at each morning. As I wrote in the book, The Alabaster Girl, morning is a promise. Contains everything. Your morning that you wake up contains everything you ever wanted for your future. That's all it is the morning. Contains everything. And it's just opening yourself up to the receptivity of all this information, the gravitational pull that we're talking about, and opening yourself up to the broad spectrum of potentiality for your life going forward. It's not planning and doing all that kind of stuff. That can come, you can do that on top of it. But designing your life is just opening your mind into receptive, ears to the ground, listen to the still small voice in the wilderness that's guiding you. You don't know where you're going to go. You have no plan. You have no idea. You don't know. You might meet a girl today. You've been single for 10 years. You might meet a girl today that you stay with for the next 60 years that you didn't plan. So it's just designing your life is putting your mind in a receptive mode of a prayerful, receptive mode, meditative mode of whatever happens today. It's the path. It's part of the chapter I'm in. Nietzsche found the idea of amor fati, which is love of fate. It kind of sounds like amorati, but it's amor fati. And he wrote in there, when I discovered this concept of amor fati, which is no matter what happens, good or bad, I'm going to love it. Love my fate no matter what. When I discovered that, he said the joy that erupted from me and the relaxation that hit my system. So it's the idea that designing life is, you don't know. Like, I'm surrounded by books. Somebody said, or I read somewhere, that the definition of happiness is having books that you're never ever going to get to be able to read. Right?
Great.
Like, let me give an example here. I'll just grab something off.
I'm glad I've got that one-liner to share with my girlfriend tonight, because she gives me stick about all the books that I spend money on and never actually read.
Yeah. So here's just here's a book. I'll just grab 3 books off my bookshelf right beside me here that I haven't read. The Written Word: How Literature Shapes the World, or Shapes History. Vladimir Nabokov, In Context. Mm-hmm. And Conversations on Art and Ethics. And I've never read these books. And I'm going to be alive for another 40 years, and I may never read these books. That's kind of cool, because you never. Now I'm interested in them again. but you know, you just don't know.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
I've heard this concept spoken of as the anti-library, and that every book actually has a vibe. And because every book has its central vibe, you can already feel it. You can already ingest somehow the wisdom of the book.
100%.
Is that still true? Yeah.
Boy, that's for sure. Like, like, you can't see it here, but down beside my rocket chair, I got these bookshelves, and down by my rocket chair, I've got at least 40 books that got bookmarks, pens in them, dog-eared, because I'm picking around at all of them. I've got, Lord Byron, just a bunch of stuff I'm pissing around with. And the knowledge that I have that vibration sitting on the floor is something about it. That's why I want to stay in my studio. And my new phase of life is I want to write and think and contemplate and look out the window and read. So these phases of life are interesting. I mean, I'm 60 now, and I'm not old or slowing down. I don't feel any older than I did when I was 20, like, at all. I can still spring up the stairs. My eyes are exactly the same. It's not that. It's more like something has be stilled in the urgency of me trying to figure it all out. You come to the notion that dark information is out there. You're not going to figure it all out. You're not going to read all your books. But the simplicity comes into your spirit, where you're not giving up. You're not settling. You just are content to say, man, I did some things in my life. I traveled, I did this kind of stuff. I tried that business. I lost a bunch of money there when I tried that. I banged all those girls, I had these great relationships, and something calms in your spirit as you go through these phases. I think you become, I don't know. And you are about to embark on a new thing. So
yeah, it's an interesting moment, because I'll be moving in 8 days today. I fly to Paris, and that's where we're going to set up for a little while. And we had a whole bunch of reasons, known and unknown, that we're making that move. And in the logistics of sorting out our house and moving over, I can't even focus on what the blank page will be.
Yeah,
because there's just too much to do. So it's a very strange
too many details.
Of overloaded with the small stuff and the stress of holding all of that. But then why am I doing all of this? Oh yeah, because we both really fancy the blank page. And literally, when I arrive in Paris, I don't know anyone, and I'm not going to try and know anyone. Not for a while. I'm just going to walk around and see what happens. I'm going to walk around feeling my own ignorance until it perhaps morphs into something different.
That's
I
cool.
could write something down, but I'm very comforted with that. I want to mention two things in closing, unless you have something else on this episode, like to
No,
bring it
I
to
just
an end.
wanted to quickly say that your walkabout that you want to do when you
Yeah.
get to France, this is what we don't do. We fill up our lives with activities. We go to the next thing, and now we're busy, busy, busy. We take classes in the evening. We take jujitsu lessons, and we constantly, we don't take time. Every man, and this is an important lesson. You must do your 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. You have to do this at phases in life. You've got to go. I mean, every year that I was with Deanna, I would take a month and go somewhere in the world to think and write. I would disappear and go off the internet. And when our first podcast that you and I started I was in Florence for a month, or I'd go to the seaside for a month and rent a little cabana or something, and I didn't leave the room. I just stayed there. Or I'd be in a nunnery. I went to a nunnery, just sit there and think and write. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but if you're a creative type, you need to do that.
Yeah, it's remarkable actually, because Adelia has she's already determined within Paris the dance. She's a dancer, so the dance classes that she's going to take, the friends that she's going to make, and people that she's going to hunt down and invite for lunch. She's got a whole list of this stuff, and it's all predetermined. Yeah. And all I can think of is it might be a lot longer than 40 days of just walking. Like I literally do not think about picking up the phone to anyone or going to any meetup or worried about community. I mean, that's a whole important conversation. Nothing. Probably close down my Facebook and other things during this time and just walk like 30,000 steps a day through.
Well, Jordan, is because your energetic creative force comes from introspection, and it's just so you need it, and you're starved for it. And if you don't get it, and if it's busy work around you all the time, and it doesn't mean you need to rest because you're overwhelmed. That's not the point. People think, it's not because you're introverted or you need to rest or you can't handle it. It's you need to be creative and productive and sense of abundance to be able to introspect and think and have moments of contemplation. If you don't get contemplation, you yearn for it, you starve for it. So that's where maybe Adelia, her contemplation is the activity and the social energy of it, but yours is not. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Or at least not now.
At least not now. You go through phases of life. So I'm the same way, man. I need introspection. I need contemplation time. And if I don't get it, I start to really feel edgy and unmoored. Yeah.
I think this is a good jumping off point, and I think it leaves those of you listening with a question of probably too many questions. We've had actually a lot of comments and so on asking us different things about dating and relationships and women, and I had a good question this morning about community and the importance of community as well. But I'm going to throw this back on you. So if you're a listener and you've been with us throughout this whole series so far, and you have a question about something to do with women or dating or how you should show up or how you could show up, how would you answer your own question in light of everything that's just been shared over the last hour or so? That's a bit of a counterintuitive question, and it forces you to really do the work here. But listening to everything that Zan said or pointed to throughout this, what do you actually get from this episode that informs your biggest question about your dating and relationship situation? Because some people think we're going off on a tangent when we have these conversations, but if you can get it, we are not. But I am asking you to make an extraordinary link.
Yeah, it's all the same subject. Everything that we've always talked about, all the In Search of the Alabaster Girl conversation, things I wrote about in the book, things I'm writing about now, things we talk about, it's all the same thing. I'm writing the same book over again. You know, I could feel it.
just with different words. Same book, different
just with
words.
different words, yeah.
All right. So if you would like more of this, join our membership. So we have a whole bunch of materials, live calls with Zan every month, where you take people's questions and answers and go deeper into this topic with a group. A whole bunch of resources. Click Amorati.net. That's correct, isn't it?
Amorati.net, AMORATI.net. We're there and join our membership and hang out with us.
Great. See you next time.